Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Man, I'm really excited that I'm getting to talk to you.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I'm not sure how much you know about me, but I do. I stream video games on Twitch. I've been doing this for about 10 years. And then over the past like 3 or 4 years, we've kind of gotten into politics. And then as a result of that, we've also gotten into philosophy. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Politics, that always leads to good, intelligent, thoughtful conversations.
Yeah, it can, depending on how you approach it. But yeah.
Yes.
Um, to give like a little bit of background on why I like you, I have like a really the way that I look at like certain figures, it's like really hard to find a combination of traits in people. I really like people that are well educated in a certain field, but also have like respect for other types of fields and an interest in those. And I don't know if you ever get this impression, but it seems impossible to find people that have like a strong interest in the hard sciences, but then are equally respectful and then have strong interests in things like philosophy or ethics or softer sciences, even like psychology or economics or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's all sorts of people of all different persuasions, but there's definitely a feeling among my physicist friends that they don't really take philosophy in particular as seriously as I might like. In fact, there's sort of a house game that is played where you say that philosophy is what we used to do before we invented science. And I think that that's just a misunderstanding of what goes on. And certainly understanding philosophy has been very useful to me as a theoretical physicist.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I've listened to about 10 episodes of your podcast. I discovered you somewhat recently. It's hard to find the time. And then I've listened to your most two recent ones. So, yeah. Okay. Where do I want to start? I'm sorry. There's like, I could talk with you about a million things.
I think to start, we should say that I have a podcast called Mindscape, and everyone should subscribe to it right away.
That is absolutely true. I have never listened to more than one episode of a podcast. Yours is the exception. And yeah, I recommend it all the time. Mindscape is a really, really cool podcast, really smart people, really awesome guests. And I've learned a lot of cool stuff in just the few episodes I've listened to so far. And I will definitely listen to the rest of it as I get time to do so.
Well, it's been fun in particular because I do have this interest in doing different kinds of things, not just physics, and that's hard to do as a professional academic. You're not told to do that. You're told to do the opposite of that, to stay inside your lane and not wander out. But the podcast gives me a reason or an excuse to talk to people who are really, really smart in very different fields. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So I emailed you with two kind of like broad topics, just because I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. And the first one kind of plays into that. So the way that I'll set this question up is, it seems like there are some people that gather a lot of information about a particular topic or in one area, become exceedingly good at one thing, and then from here, there are like two branching paths that a person can take. So using myself as an example, I used to be a semi-professional StarCraft player and I went to school for music. So I understand the depth of those two topics. And as a result of that, I'm very hesitant to say that like I know a lot about another given topic. Even if I read a little bit, I'm always thinking, there's probably way more than this. It could be way more complicated than that. So
Right.
on one end, some people are hesitant. But then on the other end, and you've experienced this firsthand because it's how I discovered you, there are some people that get pretty good on one topic, and then all of a sudden they feel like they can speak with authority on a wide variety of topics. Why do you think some people do that? I'm really curious what you think is like the distinction there, and how you can avoid the latter and I guess gravitate towards the former.
I mean, I think it's absolutely true, but I'm always a little unsure where to spread the blame, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, on one hand, I want people to have opinions about all sorts of things. I think everyone should have an opinion about everything. And of course, you should carefully calibrate how reliable your opinion is. When I'm on the podcast talking about philosophy or neuroscience or politics or whatever, I try to say, like, I am not an expert on this, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But on the other hand, I think that what happens in our society is not. I would say the real problem is not people talking about things outside their areas of expertise, but other people caring when other people talk about areas outside their expertise, right? Giving people credence because, look, if I don't care if a professional baseball player has opinions about what the interest rate should be set by the Fed. I think that's a good thing. But if I'm a financial reporter, I will not go interview the professional baseball player about that. There are real experts we could talk to.
Mm-hmm. Do you think so because of your position kind of publicly, I don't want to like name drop too hard or do anything that might hurt your future things. The two people I'm kind of thinking of when I say that, well, there's a lot we could think of, but on one example, have you seen You must have seen this. Did you see the 3 or 4 minute video that Bill Nye did on philosophy?
Oh yeah, no, that's an infamous one. Yeah, I mean, I forget whether he semi backed off that. I know that
I think he
Neil deGrasse
hardcore
Tyson.
did.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson also said bad things about philosophy, and he semi backed off of them. Stephen Hawking, in one of his books, said philosophy is dead, and his co-author Leonard Blodnov is someone I know, and I asked, like, Leonard, why in the world would you say that? And he said, yeah, I told Stephen we shouldn't say that, but Stephen said, oh no, it'll help sell books. People will love that if we say that. So there's always a question of how seriously to take these pronouncements. But you're right, Bill Nye's he gets, I think, more. We should criticize him a little bit more than most because he went out of his way to make a video, right? It wasn't just like he was being interviewed or whatever. And he said things about philosophy that were not very informed about what philosophy is or what it does. Now, but then to his credit, he did, change his mind when he was confronted with that. So, yeah, I think, maybe I always like to be fair, to spread the blame as widely as possible. I think that philosophers have not done nearly as good a job as they could in public outreach, right? In letting the world understand what philosophy does. Philosophers are just as bad as physicists at thinking that the best academics are the ones who stay in their offices and don't go out into the public sphere. And I think that philosophy has all sorts of reasons to be out there in the public sphere, explaining itself, engaging with the issues of the day in a serious way, and they need to get their hands dirty a little bit along those lines.
For sure. I'm reminded of I think it's a little paper that Daniel Dennett wrote on Chimesse. Are you familiar with this?
I don't think I know that one. Yeah, I don't think so.
Basically, it's the idea that at some point philosophy becomes a little bit self-indulgent, that somebody will write about some incredibly esoteric niche philosophical topic, and then that can spawn like a whole academic discussion that has little to no. Yeah, actually, in your oh man, I don't remember her name, but in the most recent episode you did, I think you likened this to some philosophy to like a bureaucracy, where it starts off with good intentions, but then it bloats itself into something that becomes unrecognizable and easily hated. Yeah.
Yeah, with Patricia Churchland, probably. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, all academic areas do that. Certainly, physics can very easily be blamed, and you're talking to your other friends, the physicists, not keeping your eyes on the prize and understanding the wider world. So, but I think especially in the United States, maybe it's worse in other places, maybe it's better, but we have this weird relationship with academia or with intellectual thought, right? Like people respect it in some sense, but they also feel a little defensive and wary about professors, pointy-headed intellectuals in their ivory towers saying things. And I blame the public for that. I think, we have to be a little bit more accepting of hard ideas, ideas that are difficult, that cannot be reduced to sound bites. On the one hand, and on the other hand, professors and academics can be blamed for not remembering why they're doing what they're doing, to be so lost in the weeds of their individual research projects that they forget the bigger purpose of the whole thing.
Do you ever worry about this is kind of tangential to that. I noticed, like in the last 2 episodes, do you ever worry that sometimes it feels like scientific fields, when it comes to like ethics or philosophy especially, like they push towards this sort of biological prescriptivism? Do you ever get that kind of feeling sometimes that like scientists might study something, they see, well, the world is this way, therefore it ought to be this way, especially when it comes to like the study of evolution or something?
The great thing, or the not great thing about philosophy in particular, is that nobody agrees about anything. You can really just find every single perspective. The joke that I've sometimes used is, if you got 3 philosophers in a room, they would not agree there were 3 philosophers in a room, right? So yeah, some people absolutely walk down that road, whereas some people violently object to it. And philosophy is harder to pinpoint progress in than it is physics. I think that philosophy makes progress, but I also get the fact that because there's no, experiments that prove you wrong, bad ideas can linger on for a much longer time in philosophy than they might in more scientific areas. So, in particular, the relationship between biology and morality is a tricky one. There's sort of obvious things you can say, like, well, biology is relevant to talking about what it means to be a good person. Sure, it's relevant. I mean, it's a very, very weak thing to say. Does it determine what it means to be a good person? No. And in between those two extremes, there's a lot of ground to cover. I'm pretty much over near to one side in that I don't think you can derive any notion about what objective morality is supposed to be just by starting from biology in particular or science more generally. But I'm willing to have conversations with people of all stripes.
For sure. I saw your tweets regarding the Zizek versus Jordan Peterson debate. And Peterson is another figure that kind of like inspires me to think about people that venture outside of their area of expertise a lot. I've noticed this, I think you use this phrase, like the public intellectual, where you're getting these figures like Peterson, who I've seen when I listen to him talk about self-help stuff, it seems like for the most part, he's pretty on the money. Like he's not saying anything that's very controversial. But then when he steps outside of that to touch on especially topics related to like history or politics, it's a nightmare sometimes. And not like in a I disagree with it way, but like in a it's just an absolute train wreck kind of way.
Yeah, no, I kind of get that feeling. He's a weird case. Like I haven't followed him very, very closely, but he's hard to avoid entirely. Certainly, I think sometimes I use the Dan Brown analogy. Dan Brown, the writer of the Da Vinci Code and things like that. Dan Brown is no Shakespeare. He's no Jane Austen or Tolstoy. He's not a brilliant prose stylist in any sense. But at the same time, he sells billions of books. So in some sense, he must be doing something right. He must have a skill at writing in some way, right? So people like Jordan Peterson, I think the same thing. Like he clearly has a message that is resonating with many, many people. But at the same time, he clearly says a bunch of things that I find, either abhorrent or obviously wrong. But I don't want to be... I don't want to say, well, I disagree with him, therefore nothing he says is of any value. Like if individual people find value in it and you can separate the nonsense from the sensible parts, then that's great. So I think that, there's something that the rest of us can learn from the fact that he is so popular. He is speaking to something, in a very real sense, it's much like Donald Trump winning the presidential election is a wake-up call to Democrats who have been ignoring certain segments of the electorate. That doesn't mean that Donald Trump is good in any possible way. It just means that, maybe we've been taking some people for granted and we can do more for them. That's a valuable lesson to take home.
Yeah, it's like it reminds me of the saying, like every failure is a learning opportunity or whatever. There are no mistakes, just opportunities to learn. Yeah.
That's right. So public intellectuals who I disagree with are learning opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for some people, but for other people, they become these somewhat divine figures, it seems.
Well, yeah. I mean, let me say something about that too, because I think that's I get in trouble sometimes. Not in big trouble, but I remember. I have a Patreon and I do an Ask Me Anything every month for Patreon supporters. And one of the questions I was asked was, who are your heroes, or who are your favorite people? And rather than actually mentioning some people, I said, look, don't have heroes. Like that, it's just a bad idea. Like if people are doing good things, like Shakespeare or Jane Austen, they wrote good plays and novels. Okay, that doesn't mean they're heroic people. You can admire what they did without thinking of them as great people. You don't know them personally. I mean, if you know someone personally, you get an idea of who they are. But if someone is a great scientist or a great philosopher or a great writer or a great, gymnast or whatever, those are not good heroes because you just don't know those people, and you should separate what they've accomplished from who they are.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then especially because this kind of blends into the second thing, but if you have somebody that you view as a heroic figure because of certain things you like, once you find out things you don't like, you tend to throw everything out about that person. And then it seems like you can't have any of the good qualities that were there before are no longer things that you care about.
It is, and it's. I think it's particular cognitive bias that goes that has many different manifestations or avatars. My very first podcast on Mindscape was with Carroll, who is a social psychologist who specializes in cognitive dissonance, and she and her co-author Elliot Aronson, in a wonderful book called "Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me." And it's all about how we justify all the mistakes that we make going through life. And they coined this term called the pyramid of choice. And what it means is that you have two people who are almost exactly the same in all of their beliefs, right? But there's some decision they're going to make that is 50-50. You don't exactly know which way they're going to go. But as soon as they go that way, they start justifying it ex post facto. And so things that sort of improve the way they have of saying, oh, that was the right choice all along, they accept. And things that say, well, maybe that was the wrong choice, they reject. And after a brief period of time, they have completely different sets of beliefs for this reason.
Yeah.
We tend to want everything to fit together and agree and harmonize. And probably there's good evolutionary reasons why our brains develop that way, but it is something we should try to be aware of and maybe even avoid if possible.
Yeah, I actually a large part of what I do is debate against other people online, and I actually borrowed a lot from that episode. Understanding, I think one of the points she brought up was that everybody sees themselves as a good person. So when I try to frame an argument against somebody, if I really want them to believe in it, I always frame it as though my side, is the side that they should agree with, right? Like, I know you're not racist, and I know that you really like this group of people. So like, wouldn't it make sense for this thing? Like phrasing stuff in that way, it makes it very hard for them to disagree because of course they don't see themselves as a bad person,
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's one of the big challenges. I wish, again, that we had a smarter public discourse about many things.
Yeah.
One of the big issues in the modern world to me is where do we draw the line between people we disagree with but can talk to and the enemy? Right? The people who we've given up on talking to and should just fight in some way. And, if you're downtrodden and tired of fighting, I understand and appreciate how, people you disagree with, you're just not in the mood for being patient with and dealing with. And I get that. But I certainly err on the side of thinking we should try to understand and work with and talk to as many people as possible.
Yeah, for sure. I was more on that side. So I'm 30 now, and I've been doing this for the heavy debate stuff for about 5 years. I'm curious because you've obviously been on this planet longer, so you have a little bit better perspective. I was introduced to this term a while ago in an article called Epistemic polarity, and it spoke to me on spiritual levels. Basically, the idea that with a lot of people, well, I don't want to say a lot, that's a weasel word, but it seems like there are people that when you try to have a conversation with them, you are just so absolutely opposed on what you can even consider to be real that any meaningful conversation seems almost impossible. So like, as an example, I'm loading this with a lot of conservative examples. I don't mean to, but like we might look at somebody like Donald Trump and somebody might say, hey, he had the largest audience for his inauguration. And you might go, well, hey, that's not true. Like, look at all of this evidence. And they're like, well, that's not actually important. Like, it was like kind of the meaning of the message and the fact that he got that out and the fact that he felt like it was the largest and everybody feels that way. And that's the most important thing. You end up like arguing with people that don't view like, I guess like the way that you would form like a coherent argument the same way, or it's not even relevant to them. It's more they're looking for something else, like some sort of narrative driven argument or something that, appeals to like some emotional thing. Do you feel like this is a problem that's gotten worse, or is this just a recentism bias where we always feel like it's the worst? Has it always been this way? I guess
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question because I'm a huge believer in recentism bias, and we always tend to think that things have radically changed and everything was different, in my childhood. But I think that what has changed is not the existence of this bias so much as the weaponization of it. In some sense, and I would love to see some more objective study of this because I have my own biases and recency is one of them. But I think that Fox News and talk radio, conservative talk radio coming on the scene, have just made it easier to leverage the fact that once people find a news source that they find pretty congenial, they'll tend to believe it. Now, that's a very innocent sounding statement, but that's true for all of us, right? Like we got to get our news from somewhere. And, you don't check everything. And it's not like you see every single report in a newspaper and try to triple check it with different sources and objective verification. You sort of say like, well, no, I think that this one is pretty reliable. And until someone convinces me otherwise, I'm going to believe what they say. And so if that's true and you have a whole media ecosystem that is on one side of the political divide, then you can say all sorts of things and knowing that they're not true, or not, it's not even knowing that they're not true, not caring whether they are true, right? And people will still accept them, and that's all you need to win the political battle. So as much as I want to talk to people who disagree with me and have interesting productive conversations, I certainly appreciate, I mean, that it's that not everyone is equally right, right? And that matters. And it's a big question, a big problem, how to talk with them. I think that almost always there's still some commonality of at least values, if not actually epistemic strategies that hopefully we can latch on to. But some people are just lost causes.
For sure. I try not to think of the latter because then you have to wonder, well, how many are those some people? Is it the 48% of people that voted for Trump? Is it the 51% of people that voted for Brexit? That's a really hard one. I like to think that that's not the case for obvious reasons, if for no other reason, because then we're doomed as a species, right? If that's actually the case.
If it's in the 40s, yeah. Yeah. There is. Did you know the phrase called the crazification factor of 27%? Have you ever heard this number?
No, I haven't.
So I lived in Illinois before moving to California, and we had this election for Senate when Barack Obama first ran for Senate. So I don't know what it was, 2004 or something like that. And it was that year in Illinois, which is slightly Democratic but pretty close to split in terms of Democrats and Republicans.
Sure.
There was the Republican Party in Illinois completely imploded. Like all of their candidates were arrested for corruption and things like that. And so they were left with literally no one to run for the Senate, the United States Senate. And they invited Alan Keyes to run, who is not from Illinois. He's a crazy person. He's very right wing, and he's also African American. But he had nothing going for him other than he was the Republican candidate, and he got 27% of the vote against Obama.
Gotcha.
And so the idea is like there's 27% that's the rock bottom who will simply vote for the Republican no matter what that person is or does. It wasn't racism. They were both African American candidates, right? So that's a little bit more optimistic than 42%, but it's not much. I don't know.
Interesting. This sounds like another way to rephrase. I've got like a rule that I made up when I do debates with people. I call it the 40-40-20 rule, where it seems like who I debate, no matter what either side says, 40% are rooted in on both sides and will never change their position. But you're kind of aiming for that 20% in the middle that are either light fans of both or people wandering through, and those are kind of the people that you try to move, like the people off the fence posts.
Yeah, no, that's completely true. I mean, that's my criterion for when I'm invited to do something like a debate with a religious person, like I know that I'm not going to change their mind.
Yeah, for sure.
I know that a live debate is also not the way to do serious philosophy or intellectual work, right? It's kind of a performance. But you can reach people, and there will always be people who haven't made up their minds yet. As much as so many people have made up their minds, some will not, especially younger people. Like when I need to talk to a religious audience, it depends a lot on the age demographics.
For sure, yeah.
Whether I'm going to be interested in doing this. Like once a certain point, like once they're your age, they're lost. But, if they're in their 20s, there's still a chance to have a conversation.
Yeah, I feel similarly. My mom is very religious and very conservative, but she's in her 60s. And that's a lot of your life to turn your back on, to change suddenly.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to be the same way when I'm in my 60s. Like I will have made up my mind about lots of things. Well, it's an interesting question because you want to be open-minded and willing to change your mind. On the other hand, life is short, and if you spent decades of your life coming to certain conclusions, it's going to take an overwhelming amount of contrary evidence to actually make you change your mind about something. So there's a give and take. Like at some point you say, yeah, I'm sticking with my ideas. Hopefully not for a long time yet, but I'm just honest enough to admit that it's coming.
Yeah, I guess maybe for me, because I'm still a little younger, so I'm 30, but I guess every time I look back like 2 years, I feel like I've made a lot of progress in the way that I think. Like if I could have a conversation with myself from 2 years, or especially 5 years, especially 10 years ago, it would be, radically different. Do you feel like do you feel like at this point, do you feel like you're changing your ideas or mind quite a bit if you compare it to the past like 2 to 5 years of your life, or do you feel like you're kind of like set in, or?
I definitely think that there's no question the rate of change slows down. When I was in my 20s, I would have been one of those people saying we can use biology to figure out what the right rules for morality are,
For
right?
sure.
And I've definitely changed my mind about that. You hone in on things, even within physics, right? I'm very interested in quantum mechanics and the foundations of quantum mechanics. And so there's it's a small but vibrant subfield called Foundations of Quantum Mechanics, where they debate different possibilities. But my interest is in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And my interest within Foundations of Quantum Mechanics is elaborating on many worlds and its predictions and how it works and things like that. Not debating many worlds with its competitors. Like,
Sure.
I just made up my mind that I've made a choice. Like, as a researcher, you choose to say, okay, I'm going to accept certain things and move on from there. And probably as a person, it's the same thing.
Okay, yeah. Which is what you say to do with metaethics, which I totally agree. Is there's no point debating it, or doesn't seem to be. But something earlier you said about it seems like we have like this internal set of like cognitive biases that hopefully we become aware of as we grow older. This is a very broad question. When it comes to like news media today, and it comes to technology, like we have the ability like never before to precisely tap into what a person wants to hear and then connect them to content that tells them exactly what they want to hear. And given our economic structure, right, this is a very broad question. I don't expect a perfect answer, but like, do you think that within like a capitalist framework, is it ever possible to address these types of media related problems given the set of biases that we have as humans and then the technological proficiency we have today at like honing in on these and absolutely targeting these to extract as much money as possible out of that given environment?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you ask it precisely the way you did, is there any chance at all? Sure, there's a chance, right? Is there a realistic prospect? One might wonder. I'm not super duper optimistic in the sense that there are ways in which, and I'm pretty capitalist myself, honestly. Like I'm a very welfare state capitalist, but I don't want to, I don't want the state to seize the means of production or anything like that.
Sure.
But I understand the incentive structures being what they are. Corporations want to make money. That's what they want to do. And what technology gives them is a way to use people and leverage their interests to make more money for the corporations in ways that people have trouble appreciating, when it comes to privacy and being tracked and being targeted and for different kinds of advertisements and so forth. And this is just enormous scope for abuse in those things. And I mean, you see with climate change how something pretty vivid, like, the sea level is rising. It doesn't get much more vivid than that. It's still hard to mobilize people because it just seems kind of vague and far off. And now you say, well, okay, Google is tracking where you are at every moment, and there's devices in your house listening to every word you say. And people are like, but I can order things without typing into my keyboard. So isn't that worth the compromise? So I think that as a society, it's not just capitalism, but also representative democracy, right? We're not very well equipped to take these kind of worries seriously, which makes me think that, in 20 years from now, there'll be no such thing as privacy. When 18-year-olds will just have their whole lives broadcast all the time.
It's very funny to me how as technology kind of like moves in these very small increments, you never really notice what's happening. I remember growing up, and I'm sure you do, the massive monitors that had the huge, I don't even know how we existed back in these days without even cell phones. But yeah, those massive monitors and in all the futuristic movies, if you watch 2001 or whatever, like you see like the flat screens. And you're like, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. Like when these are invented, this is always going to be cool. But now you walk into a McDonald's and you see like a 92-inch one plastic, you don't even think about it twice, and that applies to like every technological innovation, we've ever made, which is insane to me.
We're so bad at predicting the technological future. Like every science fiction movie has the same kind of telecommunications devices we have with like 5 years of extrapolation into the future. It's going to be very, very different, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of tying some of these together, and again, this is hard to do because it's the recentism. Do you feel like we're on like the precipice of something in the world in terms of like a significant choice is being made coming up? I guess I kind of like, I feel like broadly I look like you can either kind of look inward or outward, where you have like this kind of outward globalist, like we need to work together, the European Union trade agreements, and then you have like this inward, like highly protectionist, high sovereignty, closed borders, ruling ourselves and doing our own thing. Do you feel like we're on the precipice of making these huge decisions, or do you feel like it's kind of, we've always been like at ends with these two things and that struggle will just continue indefinitely?
Well, I think that we should certainly be open to the possibility that it's not just going to be business as usual. That, so it's certainly true from everything we know about the world that it's changing rapidly in a non-oscillatory way, right? There are things that are happening now and will happen in the future that have never happened before. So I don't think it's okay just to say, oh yeah, there's always this give and take back and forth, and it will pass. All things will pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could end up 50, 100, 1,000 years from now with very, very different forms of government, economy, human life, both for technological reasons with, bioengineering and computer body interfaces and things like that, and also for socio-political reasons. The United States is doing its best to fall into decline, cutting research funding, cutting off interactions between other countries, and China is not doing that. And I think that China is a terrible country, or the government is a terrible government. It's a wonderful country. You read stories about China before the Communist Revolution, and people are glowing about it. And you're like, why are they glowing about it? It's a repressive dictatorship. And you realize, oh no, it wasn't a repressive dictatorship back then. But because it's such a huge economic power and so forth, there's a lot of incentive to forget that it's a repressive dictatorship. That certainly worries me. And I don't think it's a compelling model for the rest of the world, but I'm not going to discount the possibility that it becomes that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, I guess, like, I'm curious how you think things, again, this is like very broad. I guess like looking forward, where do you think things are headed from now? Do you think when it comes to big problems like climate change, or when it comes to solving, like it feels like in America, there are so many, even smaller than climate change, when you look at things like healthcare or immigration or even our tax policy, it seems like the government for most of my life that I can remember, at least from my 20s onward, has been stuck in this gridlock where it seems like nothing has gotten done, and it seems almost impossible to get anything done, say for like a Supreme Court justice or a Supreme Court ruling, kind of giving us things, like gay marriage and whatnot. Do you see any progress being made there, or?
I do. I see a lot of progress. I think that, a lot of the, current fretting about wokeness and social justice and things like that is secretly a sign of progress, because it means that we're to the point where you can have these discussions in a way that, 20 years from now, no one was asking about transsexual rights, right? Transgendered rights or anything like that. Mm-hmm. We're a little bit more aware of things. And I think these things do ultimately filter into policy. And it's not by any means inevitable. It's enormous amounts of hard work and struggle to get there. It's not by any means something we should take for granted, and we could absolutely backslide and things could get worse. But I think that if you squint and average over the timescale of decades, for the last 200 years in the United States, things have mostly been getting better, and I think that that's still something we can hope and push for realistically.
Okay, cool. I think I agree, especially when you see people like people like AOC getting elected. Definitely would never have happened 10 years ago even, or somebody like Bernie Sanders being popular 10 years ago feels impossible.
Well, Barack Hussein Obama would not have gotten elected a few decades ago. Come on,
Yeah, that's true.
As much as people fret about Donald Trump being elected, like if you had said in 2002 that someone named Barack Hussein Obama, a black guy, was going to be elected president of the United States, they would have thought you were crazy. There is hope in some way. It's not crazy to hope. It's only crazy to think that good things will happen without trying.
For sure. I used to listen to a lot of conservative media. I still do. Rush Limbaugh would always call him that. Barack Hussein Obama. That middle name was really important.
And it didn't work. We elected him anyway by historic numbers of voters. So yay us.
Looking into like future episodes of your podcast, I guess more easier questions. Okay, so more focused on you. Is there some space that you've always wanted to kind of break into, that you've wanted to talk to people more in, that you just haven't had the opportunity to, or haven't had the access to yet? Like, what are you like really looking forward to get into in future episodes of Mindscape or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because it's an evolving thing. I just posted my 50th episode. It happens weekly, so that's about 1 year's worth of episodes. So it's a time for reflection on what we're doing. And my idea was always to have it be pretty broad, but not utterly broad. It's not like anything goes. It really wants to be focused on ideas. So people are always suggesting this or that presidential candidate be invited. And I no matter how much I love that particular presidential candidate, I would always worry about doing something like that because their incentive structure is different. They want to get elected, right? As opposed to a political scientist who might actually be able to talk about the ideas of science. So I do want to talk even more than we have been about democracy and freedom and human rights and things like that, but in a way that is not directly tied to this or that. I can't even say politics. Politics is involved, but this or that contemporary issue that people are fighting about in front of the Supreme Court or something like that, right? I mean, I want to talk about the underlying ideas. There's plenty of places where people can talk about this or that particular controversy that has flared up or this candidate or whatever. But, you know, there has to be a space to step back and have a conversation about the reasons why we should prefer one thing over another, or why do human beings act in this way rather than that way. So, you know, even though I have a lot of listeners, love my listeners, they're all wonderful. There's a certain fraction of them that would really like me to stop talking about anything other than physics. Sure. The physics episodes get more listens than any of the other ones. But yeah, I really want the show to grow into something that has a reputation of somewhere where there's intelligent conversations about all sorts of ideas. So, I mean, I mentioned sort of political things as a direction to go in, but also like cultural, artistic things. Like the other episodes that I have that are a little bit less listened to, they're all about the same. You know, these are tiny variations we're talking about. But when I talk to, you know, musicians or artists or whatever, there's slightly less listens than if I talk to psychologists or physicists. So I want to get a more culturally interested vibe going on there too.
Yeah, for sure. Which kind of plays into the first thing I asked, where I hate this. I hate the split between, you would say STEM, I guess, in soft sciences or like culture stuff. Like I feel like every human being, if you study biology or physics or chemistry, you should still have an interest in like history and sociology and anthropology. Like, I mean, we're humans, right? Like nobody does physics 24/7. You don't go home and turn on your TV to watch a physics program and then lay down and turn on your radio and listen to like a physics lecture. You know, like all of these things play into so many parts of our life. It seems sad that people hardcore segregate themselves so much to their different interests sometimes.
Yeah, and again, blame is widespread here, and scientists deserve some of the blame, and the rest of the world deserves some of the blame. You know, I think that when you turn on your TV, you can hear on the news maybe a historian or an economist or even a sociologist being interviewed, but not many physicists. And this is why Bill Nye, I think has been great for science in general, but it was not good when he was the person called in by CNN to be an expert on climate change.
Oh, yeah,
That's just not what he does, you know? And it's partly because scientists are not as part of the public conversation as they could be. I want it to be just as easy and sensible and obvious to talk to a climate scientist or an astronomer as it is an economist or a historian.
Definitely. Okay, this is a question. All of these are questions. If you could talk to somebody, I'm really curious what your answer is. If you could talk to anybody right now, bring a guest on your podcast that's alive, who would you want to talk to and why? And then if you could do the same for somebody that's dead, so somebody that's existed at some point in time, who would you choose?
Well, the alive people are tough because usually I'll ask them, and sometimes they say no.
Okay.
So I don't want to like reveal people who have said no.
Sure. We could focus on. We could just say anybody in human history. Then I guess if there's like some person in the past that you could speak to about some topic, who would it be, and what topic would you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's so many people. I already mentioned Shakespeare and Jane Austen. I would love to talk to either one of them. Especially Shakespeare. Well, for different reasons, both of them, because Shakespeare had this ability to make up words and make up phrases and make up ways of talking. And he wasn't especially super well educated himself. He had sort of a standard education as far as I understand. But he had this brilliant creativity to say things in ways that people never said them before, but ex post facto seemed so right and so useful that still today we use his way of talking often. And someone like Jane Austen, who had this very constrained lifestyle where she was in a milieu where there was one thing you could do, which is to get married, right? That's it. That was your only, option. And she managed to produce these brilliant novels that were psychologically very insightful. And I could just imagine talking to, one of these brilliant writers / novelists who are well enough known that everyone knows something about what they've written. I've had and will continue to have writers and novelists on Mindscape, but there's the obvious downside or obstacle, which is that most members of the audience will not have read what they've written, right? Sure. I mean, most young authors today are not taught in high schools, so that makes that a little bit harder. Scientists would love to talk to Einstein and Galileo, especially Einstein. I would love to talk to because I think with a short conversation, I could bring him up to date on modern conversation about cosmology and quantum mechanics, and I would love to see what he said about that. Philosophers, David Hume, John Stuart Mill. There's a woman who I write about in my book, The Big Picture, Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who was the world's best critic of René Descartes. She didn't really write any books herself, but she and Descartes wrote letters back and forth. And she was the one who pointed out it doesn't really make sense to imagine that the mind is disembodied and completely separate from the human body. And she went on to be a sort of a human rights activist and worked with the Quakers and William Penn and other things like that. So there's these sort of more obscure figures from history that I would love to make a little bit more well known.
Sure. If you could choose one thing at the end of the day, so obviously you have a public platform, you've got a ton of people that listen. If people listen to every single episode of your podcast and they kind of have to take a general idea or a general concept from you, what would that one thing be that you would want them to take from you? What's the one thing you want them to walk away with at the end of the day?
Probably some. Can I pick two things?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, sure.
One thing is Bayesian reasoning. So in the following sense, I think that we approach the world with a set of pre-existing beliefs, what is true, what is not true, a set of attitudes towards propositions. And what we should do is assign probabilities to each one of them being true or not being true, and then update those probabilities rationally in light of new evidence or arguments as they come in. And that's very easy to say in principle, very hard to pull off in practice, because evolution did not design us to be perfect reasoners, right? To use logic. Logic and Bayesian reasoning came along quite late in evolutionary history. So instead, we're a bundle of biases and intuitions and heuristics that get in the way of, as we've already discussed, of being perfect reasoners. So that sort of evidence-based, updating your beliefs kind of reasoning, which is formalized by Bayesian inference in the technical jargon, is something that I would like people to appreciate. And then on the other side, some version of kindness, generosity, charitability towards other ideas and other people. And this is where I'm not great at being rational Bayesian reasoner, but I'm certainly not great at being very generous with people that I disagree with, and I'm trying to be better at that. I do think that there is a line one draws where one says, okay, no, you're just the enemy now, and I'm just going to fight you. I'm not going to reason with you. But I think that should be a very tiny number of people who you encompass with that categorization. So the ability to talk to people who are people I disagree with in a productive way, hopefully rubs off on the wider listenership.
Okay, that's awesome. Those are two great things to have people take away. Okay, I have to ask you, this is the most important question I'm going to ask you all day. I'm not going to argue with it. I just want to hear what you think the answer is and then your rationale for it, okay?
Yeah.
Have you ever, I don't know what your background is with video games, but have you ever heard of a game called Portal?
I have heard of Portal, yes.
Okay. We have spent an inordinate amount of time discussing a very stupid picture. So in Portal, something goes in one portal and comes out the other end, right? That's how it essentially works, right? Okay.
Yes.
You're the most highly qualified physicist we've ever asked this question to. I've linked you a picture in the Skype call.
Here it is. Yes.
Given that Portal Orange comes down at some given speed and then stops and encompasses the little box on the platform, will A or B result from this, and why? I'm so curious.
Do you want to guess, or should I tell? I know the right answer.
You know there's a right answer?
There is a right answer. There is. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, tell us. Go.
It's B.
Why is that?
Because really the porthole is a wormhole. This is something that we have in the theoretical physicist toolbox. We don't have them in the real world. Don't get too excited. But we can talk about what is going on. And the way to answer it is this. Imagine that just to the other side of the orange portal, right? Someone is standing there. Right? From their point of view, they're stationary with respect to the orange porthole, right?
Of course.
And they see the little box rushing toward them when they look through the portal. So when that box crosses the threshold from one side to the other, it doesn't stop rushing toward them. It continues to rush toward them. So they would see it on their side rushing toward their face.
That's a perfect answer. I 100% agree. We've spent so much time arguing about this, but okay. It's a really dumb question, but you're the most excited person I've ever got to talk to before, and I've met a lot of like random celebrities and whatnot, so I'm really, really happy that you made the time. You didn't have to. I'm not like a big name in podcasting or anything, so I'm really happy you did. For people that are looking to find your stuff, what's like the best place to find all of your stuff? What's like the best link you could give people?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called preposterousuniverse.com. I was too clever to just go for SeanCarroll.com. I don't know why I did that, but preposterousuniverse.com is, I forget what SeanCarroll.com is now. I think that, I visited last 5 years ago and it was not in service or whatever, but someone had claimed it. Anyway, I have links there to my books. I have a lot of YouTube videos. Most of my YouTube videos, by the way, are not videos I made. They're talks or interviews I did and someone else recorded them, but they're there. And then, of course, the podcast. I have a blog where I used to be super active on the blog. These days, most of the energy that would go into blogging goes into either Twitter if it's brief, or the podcast, or books if it's longer. So those are my, besides my research, which is also there, like all my technical papers, if you're interested in physics, the technical papers are there, but most of my popular level stuff is either Twitter, the podcast, or the books.
Gotcha. What is the best place to find your podcast? If people could listen on one platform, would you want it to be on your website with the /podcast at the end, or is there like a preferred area to find those?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. The one exception that is useless to me is YouTube. You can So I love YouTube in general, but there was this clamoring when I started the podcast, put it on YouTube. And I explained, like, there's no video. It's just audio. Maybe someday if I get 1 million listeners per episode, I'll have video, but that's very far in the future. But they said, no, we want it on YouTube anyway. So it turns out that my podcasting provider will put it up on YouTube, right? So there's just a still image of the podcast logo and the audio, and you can listen on YouTube. And that is not the way to listen if you have a choice, because those downloads don't count toward my total, but any other way works. So I actually use Overcast as my on my iPhone for listening to podcasts myself. But if you want to listen in Apple Podcasts or Google Play or Stitcher or on my website, preposterousuniverse/podcast, all of those are equally good for me.
Okay, awesome. I'm curious on this, and you don't have to answer this with any specificity because it's a business question. Do you intentionally stay away from plugging sponsors or anything, or is that just something you haven't explored yet?
No, in fact, I'm going to start.
Okay.
That's in the pipeline. I wanted. It's only been a year that I've been doing the podcast, and it was certainly very tentative when I started. Like I wasn't sure how long it would take, how much time I'd be willing to devote to it. The good news is, it took a lot of time to set up, but it's been pretty easy to keep it going. It's not a tremendous amount of hours of my week that it takes because I don't edit it very much. I don't do a lot of polishing and post-production, so it's pretty low key. So I think I can keep up in my current situation. I can keep up, doing a podcast a week, no problem. So given that, I think I was finally ready to sort of say, I could imagine taking ads. And if I get enough ads and, there's enough listeners that there is income there, then I might start doing video or something like that. But the thing, I certainly recognize that having ads makes it a less aesthetically appealing experience to listen to the podcast. I get that. But on the other hand, if I have ads, then I have a whole organization that is interested in more listeners coming to my podcast, right?
Yeah.
So
and you can do so much more. Having like video or a studio or being able to fly guests out or whatever, it opens all of that up as well. And lets you justify spending more time on it too. Yeah.
That's right. So it does open things up, and I'm self-important enough that I would like more people to listen to my podcast. I think that we're doing interesting things. I think that this is the kind of conversations I'm having are ones I wish more people were paying attention to. So yeah, I want as many people to listen to it as possible. Even if I weren't making money from it, I would still want that. It just so happens that the way to have that happen is also a way that I get paid to do it. So that sounds like something I would say yes to.
Okay, awesome. Okay, it's been 54 minutes. I have one more physics question for you. Okay, we argue about so much stuff on my stream, and so it's really fun to have a physicist guy here. Okay, this you might not be able to give a simple answer to this. Okay, but this has come up time and time again. So I have my background is I'm a college dropout in music. Okay, so all the information I've gathered from Wikipedia articles. So my depth of knowledge is not very good on any particular field. Okay, in quantum mechanics, oftentimes you speak in terms of like probabilities for like locations of things, right?
Yep.
So is it a fact of the world that these things on a quantum level don't have like an actual place in space, or are probabilities just the way that we represent it so that we can understand it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. In fact, this is a debate that physicists have with themselves. So in my upcoming book called Something Deeply Hidden, which will be out in September, which is all about quantum mechanics, I give my point of view on this, where I say very confidently that there is no such thing as the position of the particle. All there is the quantum wave function. And the weird and wonderful thing about quantum mechanics is that what you see when you look at a quantum system is not what there is before you looked at it. What you see is a particle with a position, but that's not what it was before you looked at it. And I think that's far and away the simplest, most straightforward interpretation of where quantum mechanics has brought us. There are, having said that, other people who think very differently. There are what are called epistemic approaches to quantum mechanics, where they really do imagine that the uncertainties, the probabilities that come up when you do quantum mechanics are ultimately traceable to the fact that there's just something we don't know about the universe, that there is a reality of it, but that there's something that we can't, that we don't yet know is going to happen in the future. I don't see why we would go there. I mean, the efforts to, you can say those words, but to be a good physicist, you have to turn that into a theory of how everything would work. And, maybe someday you would have quantum field theory and quantum gravity and that framework and blah, blah, blah. And I just don't see it working. So I think that it's much better to just accept the idea that the world is something richer and more interesting than a bunch of particles with positions.
So I'm just curious, how does this manifest when we ask questions related to, say, like determinism? Does this mean that there are truly random events that can occur, like on a macro level, or do those little random positions of particles not impact things on a macro level as much?
Well, so there's two things. One is, so if you buy into the many worlds version of quantum mechanics, which is the one that I buy into, then the wave function of the entire universe evolves deterministically. So there's the quantum state of literally everything that obeys an equation, the Schrodinger equation, which is completely deterministic and reversible. You can take it to the future or the past. The problem is that as time goes on, our individual classical world that we find ourselves in is just one branch of this wave function, and more branches are created that look more or less like duplicates, but not quite, of our universe. So even though the universe, considered as the set of all the branches, evolves deterministically, any one person finds themselves in a branch and they don't know which branch it is.
Gotcha.
So for all intents and purposes, evolution is probabilistic. That's the explanation within many worlds for why quantum mechanics seems to involve probabilities. Now, so that's the sort of deep level metaphysical answer. You've also put your finger on, well, so how does that affect my life? There is a classical limit in quantum mechanics. You don't need to understand quantum mechanics to fly a rocket to the moon, for example. The moon will be there where we predict it to be, just under the rules of classical mechanics. But when you talk about a person and their thoughts and things like that, that comes down to the firing of neurons, and maybe there's some quantum mechanics involved there. That's something we just don't know, as far as I understand. The extent to which we can treat the operations of neurons in our brains deterministically versus probabilistically is a little unclear, at least to me. Certainly, classical mechanics is a really good approximation, but whether it's good enough to take into account the human brain, I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All right. Well, hey, this is awesome. I'll link your stuff. I really appreciate the talk. And where in California are you at? Are you like central? Are you in the LA area? Are you northern?
I'm in LA. Yeah, Pasadena is where Caltech is, and I actually live in LA proper. So Southern California, where it is beastly hot this week.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah. Yep, I live in Glendale, and it was 100 degrees yesterday, so I 100% know what you mean. Okay, that's awesome. Thanks. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, so like this is the part where I'm going to disagree with you. Okay, so the second thing that you said.